He came to her door at 2 in the morning with blood on his shirt and 6 men in the wagon behind him, and the specific quality of a man who had run out of options and knew it. Her name was Nessa, and she had been in the Fallow Creek district for 11 years and had spent most of those years in the specific condition of a person who was known without being welcomed, which was the condition that followed from being the daughter of a Pell woman in a district that had decided what it thought about the Pell community 8 years before Nessa had arrived and had not revisited the decision. The Pell community had been healers and farmers on the Eastland near Calloway for 2 generations, and they had been known in the surrounding district for the quality of their healing, which was real, empirical, and effective, and for a set of practices that the surrounding district found unfamiliar, and that the unfamiliarity had made suspicious over time. The suspicion had existed for years before it became actionable, and it became actionable during the land dispute of 1871 when 2 families from the district had wanted the East Calloway land that the Pell community held and had found that the existing suspicion of the Pell practices was a useful instrument for the wanting. The accusations that followed were about healing methods that produced outcomes the district could not account for in their own terms, and the inability to account for the outcomes had been reframed as evidence of something wrong rather than evidence of something unfamiliar, and the reframing had been convenient for the 2 families who wanted the land. The Pell community had dispersed. Some had gone north, some east, some had simply ceased to organize as a community and had merged with the surrounding district over the years. The land had gone to the 2 families. The distrust of the Pell name had remained in the district's memory in the way that community decisions about outsiders remained, not because anyone reviewed the evidence and maintained the conclusion, but because the conclusion had become a fact the district carried without examining. Nessa's mother had been one of the Pell healers. She had been among the best of them, not by the district's accounting, which had never accurately accounted for her, but by the accounting of the people she had helped, and there had been many of those across many years. Nessa had grown up watching her mother work and had learned the way children learned from parents who were genuinely expert at something, which was through proximity and attention and the specific absorption that happened when you were small and present while a capable adult did capable things and explained what they were doing. She had learned wound management and fever management, and the specific pharmacological properties of the plants that grew in the Fallow Creek district and the East Calloway land. She had learned to read injury the way her mother read it, with hands and ears and eyes, all at once, building the picture from multiple inputs simultaneously rather than in sequence. She had learned the difference between the wound that would heal with management and the wound that was going to require more than management, and she had learned this difference the way her mother had learned it, which was from observation across many cases over many years, and the observation had begun when she was old enough to observe and had continued without interruption. What the learning had also given her was the association with the Pell name in a district that did not trust the Pell name. And the association had produced the 11 years of being known without being welcomed. She did not practice openly. She did not offer her services. She had not chosen the invisibility as a strategy. She had arrived in the district at 25 with the intention of practicing openly, and the first 3 years had shown her, through accumulated small signals and one large one, that open practice in this district was not going to be possible. She had retreated into the specific position she had occupied since, which was, known by those who needed to know, available in extremity, not otherwise visible. She was 36 now, and the 11 years had not diminished what she could do. What they had not provided was the accumulation of cases that open practice would have provided, the catalog of outcomes, the refinement of technique across many patients, the specific knowledge that only came from practice. She had a dozen consultations over 11 years instead of what should have been hundreds, and the dozen were fewer than her mother would have had and fewer than the people of the district deserved. This was the cost of the outcast status, and it was a cost paid not only by Nessa. The knock came at 2 in the morning on a Thursday in July. The knock came at 2 in the morning on a Thursday in July, and she was awake because July nights on the Fallow Creek Range were the nights when a woman with her knowledge slept lightly, and the reason was that July was the month of storms. She had spent 11 Julys in the district and had learned that the storms of July came fast and that fast storms on open range with cattle produced specific conditions, and the specific conditions were the conditions that brought people to her door at hours when other doors were closed. She opened the door. He said, "I have 6 men. I need someone who can tend wounds." "I was told you could." She looked past him at the wagon. She could see the men in the wagon, the specific shapes of people who had been hurt and were being managed, some of them still, some of them moving. The stillness concerned her more than the movement. She said, "How many critical?" He said, 2 that I know of. Maybe 3. She said, "What happened?" He said, "Lightning struck the South Range during the night crossing. The herd panicked. 3 men thrown, 4 more hurt in the regaining. 1 man has a broken arm I can feel through the skin. 1 has something wrong in his chest. He's breathing, but the breathing sounds wrong. There may be a head injury. The rest are cuts and concussions, and I don't know what else." She was already moving. She had learned to move while she was still talking, because in emergencies of this kind, the movement and the assessment and the instruction were all happening simultaneously, and any of them delayed for the others was time lost. She said, "Bring them into the barn. It's larger than the house, and I need the space." She said, "There's a lantern on the post. Light it, and 2 more inside the door." She said, "The man with the chest, bring him in first." She went to the barn and got the space ready in the 2 minutes before the first man arrived, which was not a great deal of time, and was enough time to do the specific things that made the space functional: clear the center, bring the hay for positioning, locate the water, confirm the light was adequate. In 12 years of being called in emergencies, she had learned that 2 minutes of preparation was worth 10 minutes of working in a disorganized space. The chest injury man was first. She had him on the floor under the central light before she had asked Cass anything beyond his name and the man's name, because names were the first thing, and then the injury. She assessed in the way her mother had taught her, and that she had refined across 12 years, hands, ears, eyes, simultaneously, building the picture from multiple inputs at once. The chest told her what it told her: rib fracture. Air in the wrong place, but the wrong kind, not the worst kind. He was moving air on both sides. This was manageable. This was not the version that killed you in the night if you lay quietly in the right position with someone watching. She gave Cass the instructions for monitoring and went to the arm. The arm told her what it told her: compound fracture of the radius, clean break, good bone position for setting, wound around the break that needed careful debridement. The man's name was Rillo, and he was young, and his color was reasonable, and he was doing the correct thing with the pain, which was managing it rather than expressing it. She told him what she was going to do before she did it. This was another thing her mother had taught her: a patient who knew what was coming was a patient who could help you rather than resist you, even involuntarily. The setting took 40 minutes and was done correctly. She knew when a bone had moved to where it needed to be, there was a specific quality to the resistance that changed when the alignment was right, and the change was unmistakable once you had felt it enough times to recognize it. The concussion man was third, and he was the one she spent the most time assessing before she acted, because concussion was the injury where the assessment was the most of the treatment. She needed to know where it was on the spectrum, and she needed to know what the trajectory was. and she needed time to know both. She sat with him for 10 minutes and talked to him and pressed specific points and watched his responses and built her picture of what she was working with. The picture was severe, but not the worst severity. Unequal pupils but responsive to light. Slow responses but oriented. Improving slightly across the 10 minutes. This was the version that you could manage through the night with monitoring and that you could reasonably expect to survive without lasting damage if nothing changed in the wrong direction. If something changed in the wrong direction, she would know, and she would do what could be done. She assigned monitoring and went to the remaining men. His name was Cass Aldrin, and he was 39, and he had been running the Follow Creek spread for 11 years, which meant he and Nessa Quirk had been in the same district for the same amount of time, and he had known who she was for most of those 11 years, in the specific way that a practical man knew the practical resources of his district. He knew who she was, the way he knew where the nearest well was, the way he knew which section of the road flooded first in the spring. The way he knew which of his men could work through pain and which ones needed managing when they were hurt. He knew it as operational knowledge. The knowledge that a man who ran a working spread accumulated about the territory he operated in. Not because he was sentimental about the territory, but because the territory was where the work was, and knowing the territory was how you ran the work. He had not formed a view on the community's distrust of the Pell name. He was aware of the distrust and was aware of its history in the way that everyone in the district was aware of both. But the history was before his time in the district, and the distrust had always seemed to him to be about something other than what it claimed to be about, which was the nature of community distrusts in general, and he had not found a reason to either adopt the distrust or challenge it. And so he had done neither, and had simply filed the information about Nessa Quirk under the operational heading of, she is here, she has the knowledge, the results, when she has been used, have been good. He had 7 men on the summer night crew for the crossing. The crossing was the movement of a portion of the herd from the South Range to the East Water in preparation for the rotation that July required, and it was the kind of operation that in normal conditions was manageable at night and in abnormal conditions was dangerous. July conditions in the Fallow Creek district were not reliably normal. The lightning had struck at midnight, close enough to the South Range that the crack and the flash had been simultaneous, and the herd had broken in the way that cattle broke when lightning struck close, which was all at once and in multiple directions without coordination, and the men on the south and east flanks had caught the worst of it. 3 men had been thrown from horses that had also panicked. 1 man had been in the path of the turning cattle and had taken a blow from a running animal that had hit him in the chest. 3 more had been hurt in the regaining, cuts and concussions, and a wrist injury from a fall in the dark. By the time Cass had the herd contained and accounted, and the men gathered and assessed in the dark with what light they had, he had made the calculation. The calculation had several inputs: the apparent severity of the injuries, the time to the Calloway doctor, the condition of the road at this time of night, the specific risk of moving a man with a possible chest injury for 3 hours in a wagon, and the operational knowledge that Nessa Quirk was 3 miles north. The calculation had produced an answer, and he had acted on it. He had put the men in the wagon with 2 of the uninjured crew to manage them, and had ridden ahead himself, and had come to her door at 2 a.m. with blood on his shirt. Not his blood. The blood of the man with the chest injury who had been in his arms when they had moved him to the wagon, and 6 men in the wagon behind him. She went to work. She had laid the chest injury man on the barn floor under the light and had her hands on him before Cass had finished bringing the others in. She was assessing in the way she assessed, which was with her hands and her ears and her eyes simultaneously, not in sequence, but all at once, the way that a person assessed who had done this enough times that the assessment was not a procedure, but a perception. She said to Cass, without looking up, "What did he hit?" He said, "I don't know. He was thrown when the herd turned. I found him on the ground." She said, "He hit something on his left side. There's a rib fracture, possibly two. The wrong sound in the breathing is air in the wrong place. It's not the worst version, he's moving air on both sides. I need to watch him and keep him still and on his right side, and I need someone to stay with him and tell me if his breathing changes." She looked up at Cass. She said, "Can you stay with him while I see the others?" He said yes. She gave him the specific instructions of a person giving instructions to someone who did not have her knowledge and needed to know exactly what to do and nothing more. What to watch for, what constituted a change, what to do if the change came. Cass received them the way he received operational instructions in difficult situations, which was completely and without the questions that were not necessary. She went to the man with the compound fracture. The compound fracture was what she had expected from Cass's description in the road, a break severe enough that the bone had come through the skin at the forearm. The man was Rillo, 24, and he was conscious and managing his pain with the specific controlled quality of a young man who understood that managing it was the correct thing to do. His color was still reasonable, and the break, while severe, was a clean fracture and not a shattered one. She assessed the positioning. The blood flowed distal to the injury, the skin condition around the wound. She introduced herself the way she always introduced herself in these situations. She said, "I'm going to clean this and set it and splint it. The cleaning is going to be the most painful part. I need you to tell me when the pain is about to make you move involuntarily so I can stop and let it pass." He said he understood. She cleaned and set and splinted. The cleaning required full debridement of the wound around the break, which was the part that produced the most pain and the most risk of the patient moving at the wrong moment, and Rillo told her twice, and she stopped twice, and waited, and resumed. The setting required traction and manipulation that she applied with the specific confidence of someone who understood bone mechanics and had set fractures before, and the bone moved to where it needed to be and held. The splinting she did with the materials from her kit, plus the straight wood that any well-run barn provided. She was done in 40 minutes, and the arm was set correctly. She would not know until the Calloway doctor confirmed it, but she was confident. She moved to the concussion man. He was awake, but his pupils were not equal, and his responses to questions were slower than they should have been. This was the injury that concerned her most after the chest. A concussion of this severity could go in either direction. It could resolve with rest and monitoring and produce no lasting damage, or it could reflect something more serious that the monitoring would reveal. What she needed was time and information, and the time was the rest of the night, and the information was what his condition told her across the hours. She sat with him for 10 minutes, assessing and talking, and during the 10 minutes she identified 3 things. He was oriented to person and place, which was good. His responses were slow, but improving over the 10 minutes, which was also good, and he had a specific kind of headache that she associated with the better kind of concussion rather than the worse kind, based on where it was and what it felt like when she pressed specific points around the skull. She could not fix a concussion. What she could do was keep him awake, keep him quiet, keep stimulation low, and monitor for the signs of deterioration. She assigned the most mobile of the injured men, the one with the sprained wrist, to sit with the concussion man through the night, and she gave him the instructions he needed. She went through the lacerations and the remaining injuries, 7 cuts that needed cleaning, 5 that needed closing, 3 that were deeper than they appeared on first assessment and required careful work to close correctly. She moved through them in order of severity and worked steadily and without rushing, because rushing was how mistakes were made, and mistakes in wound closure produced infections, and infections produced outcomes she was not willing to produce. Cass watched her work from his position with the chest injury man. He had been watching her for 2 hours by the time she reached the final lacerations, and what he had been watching was a person doing a thing they were very good at in conditions that were not ideal: inadequate light. No assistance for most of it. Patients in varying degrees of distress, multiple serious problems competing for priority, and handling all of it without a single moment that looked like uncertainty or panic or the performance of competence. It was the real thing, and he knew the real thing when he saw it, because he spent his life managing operations, and he understood what genuine expertise looked like. This is Dusty Vows, where he came to her door at 2 a.m, and she asked how many critical before she asked his name. If you want the next story the moment it lands, subscribe now. Then, back to the barn. The night went as nights of this kind went, which was in the specific rhythm of managed urgency that was different from panic and different from routine. She assessed each man. She triaged in the way she had been taught, the most serious first and the stable last, and she moved through them systematically, not hurrying but not pausing for anything that was not necessary, because in a barn with 7 injured men, the management of time was as important as the management of the injuries. The chest injury was the ongoing variable. She could not fix the chest, she could only manage it and monitor it and keep the conditions correct for it to stabilize on its own. This was the kind of injury that required patience, which was the hardest thing to exercise in a barn at 3 a.m. with 6 other people needing attention. She had learned, across 12 years, that the patience was not passive. It was the active maintenance of the correct conditions, and the active maintenance required her to return to the chest injury man on schedule, regardless of what else was happening. She worked through the night. She returned to the chest injury man at intervals, checking his breathing, adjusting his position when the position needed adjusting, monitoring the specific sounds that would tell her if the air situation was worsening. The sounds held steady. Twice they seemed to worsen slightly, and twice she had Cass help her reposition, and twice the sounds came back. By 4 a.m, the chest injury man was stable in a way she was beginning to believe would hold. The concussion man's responses were improving across the night, slowly but consistently, and the consistent direction was the thing she was watching for. The man with the sprained wrist was doing his job with the concussion patient correctly and without needing to be corrected more than once on one specific thing, and the one correction he received he implemented without argument, which was the quality she needed from an assistant who was working with her specific instructions and no general training. She went through the lacerations methodically. 7 cuts that required cleaning, 5 that required closing. She used what she had from her kit and what the barn itself provided, which in a well-run barn was more than most people expected. She cleaned and closed and dressed and moved to the next, and by the time she was finished with the lacerations, the sky outside was beginning to shift from dark to the specific quality of pre-dawn that was not yet light but was no longer the middle of the night. Cass watched her work from his position with the chest injury man. He had been watching since the compound fracture, since the moment Rillo had told her the pain was peaking, and she had stopped instantly and waited and resumed exactly when it was right to resume, without being told. And he had understood from that moment that what he was watching was not competent care, but something beyond that. He had known, in an abstract way, that Nessa Quirk had the knowledge. He had not known what the knowledge looked like in practice, and what it looked like in practice was this. The barn at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning, 7 men being managed sequentially without any one of them being lost. The instructions given to Cass exactly right so that he was useful rather than in the way. The monitoring and the checking and the adjusting all happening without any visible effort at coordination, because the coordination was internal and had been internal for 12 years of practice. She went to the barn door and stood in the pre-dawn air for a moment and came back inside. Cass was at the far end of the barn where the chest injury man was lying. He had stayed with the man through the night the way she had told him to, without complaint and without needing to be managed. He looked up when she came back in. She said, "He's going to need the Calloway doctor when you can get him there, but the night is done. The breathing sounds are holding. The concussion needs monitoring through the day. The arm I'm confident about if they keep it still and dry. The rest are going to hurt for a week and be fine." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "All of them." She said, "All of them." He was quiet again in the way of a man who was processing something that was larger than the statement that contained it. All of them had been, when he came to her door at 2 a.m, not a certainty. He had known this when he made the calculation. The calculation had been the risk of going to her was lower than the risk of not going to her. The outcome of the calculation was all of them. He said, "I want to say something." She said she was listening. He said, "I've known you were here for 11 years and I've never come to you before tonight." He said it without apology and without the specific embarrassment that might have accompanied it. He said it as a statement of fact, the way he stated operational facts. He said, "I came tonight because the alternative was worse." He said, "That's not a reason to be proud of." She looked at him. He said, "What you did tonight, I watched you work for 5 hours. I know what competence looks like. I've been running a spread for 11 years, and I know what it looks like when someone is genuinely good at what they're doing." He said, "You are the best I have seen at anything." She was quiet. He said, "I don't know what to do with the fact that you've been 3 miles north for 11 years, and I didn't come until I had 6 men in a wagon." She said, "You came when you needed me." He said, "I should have come before I needed you." She said, "People usually don't." He said, "That's not a good reason." She said, "No." She said it simply. Not as a rebuke, but as an agreement. He said, Nessa, her name, the first time with the full weight of it, said the way a name sounded when it was the name of the woman who had opened her door at 2 a.m. and had asked how many critical before she asked his name and had gone to work in a barn by lantern light through a July night with 7 injured men. She waited. Tell me, when she asked how many critical, before she knew his name, before she knew what he thought of her, before he said anything except "I have 6 men," did you hear what that told you about what the outcast status had never touched? The work. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now, back to the barn door. I'm not going anywhere. She said it the way she said the things she had decided, which was directly and with the specific quality of a person whose hands had been working all night and who had nothing left to perform and was saying the accurate thing in the accurate way. She held his gaze in the pre-dawn light at the barn door. "You came to my door at 2 a.m. because your men needed tending, and you knew I could tend them, and I tended them, and they are all going to be all right, and I am not going anywhere." As if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. Cass Aldrin. Her name for him said the way a name sounded when it was the name of the man who had come to her door at 2 a.m. with blood on his shirt and had said, "I have 6 men, and I need someone who can tend wounds," and had stayed through the night with the man she had assigned him and had watched her work, and had said, "You are the best I have seen at anything." He nodded once. He said, "I'm going to come back." She said, "Yes," he said, "not for another emergency." She said, "I know." He said, "To come back. Just to come back." She looked at him. She said, "Cass." He said, "Yes." She said, "The barn needs to be cleaned and the supplies I used need to be replaced and the man with the chest needs to get to Calloway before noon." She said, "Come back after that." He said yes, the barn was behind them and the pre-dawn air was around them, and the Follow Creek spread was a mile to the south, and Nessa Quirk was at her own property, and neither of them was going anywhere. She had been the Outcast healer for 11 years, and she was not going anywhere, and the distance between those two things was a night in a barn with 7 injured men and a man who had come to her door at 2 a.m. without sentiment and without hesitation. And the morning was here, and she was staying. The 11 years of being known without being welcome were behind her, and the morning was in front of her, and the morning contained 7 men who were going to be all right. 7, not 6. She had recounted them in the last hour, and the number was 7 because the 2 uninjured men who had managed the wagon on the road had also been assessed, and both of them had minor injuries they had not mentioned that she had found when she made the final pass through the barn. A bruised rib and a cut on one hand. She had addressed them. 7 men in the barn who were going to be all right, and the being all right was her work. She had been trained for this kind of night. Not specifically. Not by a teacher who had said, now we will prepare for the night when 7 men come to your barn in the dark after a lightning strike and a stampede, but in the general way of a person whose training had been deep enough and broad enough to produce readiness for the specific thing when the specific thing arrived. Her mother had trained her in that way, not in procedures, but in principles, and principles were more useful than procedures, because principles adapted and procedures required the situation to match the template. The principle her mother had stressed above all others was, read first, act second, always in that order, never the reverse. The reading produced the picture, and the picture produced the action, and the action without the picture was guessing. She had read every man in the barn last night before she had touched them in any way that was treatment rather than assessment, and the reading had produced a picture of the barn that she had been updating continuously through the night. And the continuously updated picture had been what allowed her to be in 7 places sequentially without losing track of what any one person needed. This was what her mother had taught her. This was what the Pell community had practiced and what the district had rejected along with the land. The rejection had been about land and accusation and the specific kind of community memory that preserved a conclusion without examining the evidence for it. And the evidence was in the barn, alive and stable. And the evidence was 7 men. The outcast status had never touched the work. This was the thing she had understood for 11 years and had had no occasion to demonstrate at the scale of a single night in a barn. The community's distrust had touched her practice, had reduced it, had limited it, had produced the 11 years of the dozen consultations instead of the hundreds she should have had. But it had not touched what the work was, and what the work was what the barn contained at the break of a July morning. Cass Aldrin was going to come back. Not for an emergency. He had said this explicitly, and she had received it with the specific quality of a person who understood what it meant without requiring it to be elaborated. He was going to come back, and the coming back was going to be the beginning of something that was different from 11 years of being known without being welcomed, and the different was going to take the form of what it took the form of when it arrived, and she was willing to find out what form it took. The chest injury man was going to reach the Calloway doctor with the breathing sounds holding. She was confident of this now, in a way she had not been at 2 a.m, when the confidence had been tentative and the monitoring had been the thing she was depending on to produce it. By the pre-dawn assessment, she had genuine confidence. The breathing was stable and the position was holding, and the ribs would heal. The compound fracture was going to heal correctly. She had said it correctly, she was as certain of this as she was certain of anything in her work, and the Calloway doctor was going to confirm it or correct her. And she was prepared for either outcome, but she believed the outcome was going to be confirmation. The concussion man was awake, and his responses were improving. He was going to have a difficult week. He was not going to have a difficult life. All of them were going to be all right. This was the morning's conclusion and the morning's evidence and the night's work, and neither of them was going anywhere. The Fallow Creek district was going to know about the night. 7 men were going to go back to the Fallow Creek spread and recover, and the story of how they had been tended was going to travel the way that stories traveled in a district which was completely and without anyone directing the travel. The district was going to know that Nessa Quirk had been in a barn all night with 7 injured men, and all 7 were going to be all right, and the knowing was going to be added to what the district already knew about her. And what the district did with the addition was the district's to decide. She was not going to wait for the decision. She was going to be at her property 3 miles north of the Fallow Creek Range, and she was going to be practicing. And the practicing was going to be open from now on in the way that it should have been open for the 11 years she had been here. And if the community's distrust was going to be revised by the evidence of 7 men, then the revision was available to them. And if it was not going to be revised, then the work was still the work, and the work did not require the revision to continue. Cass Aldrin was going to come back, not for an emergency. This was the other thing. The two things were not separate. The coming back was related to the 7 men the way that things were related when they both came from the same source, which was a man who made correct calculations and came to the right conclusion and acted on the conclusion without sentiment and without hesitation. And the conclusion about the 7 men and the conclusion about the coming back were both his conclusions and both correct. She had been the Outcast healer for 11 years, and she was not the Outcast healer now. She was Nessa Quirk, and Nessa Quirk was at her property 3 miles north of the Fallow Creek Range, and the barn was cleaned, and the supplies were going to need replacing, and the chest injury man needed to get to Calloway before noon, and there was a great deal to do, and she was going to do it, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. She had opened her door at 2 in the morning and had asked how many critical, and the answer had been 2 that I know of, maybe 3. And she had said, bring the man with the chest in first, and she had been working since then until now. And the now was the pre-dawn of a July morning, and the barn contained 7 men who were going to be all right. The asking how many critical before asking anything else was the thing she had been doing for 12 years, and the thing her mother had done before her, and the thing that the Pell community had practiced for 2 generations, and the practice had been accumulated and refined across those 2 generations, and had produced in Nessa the specific depth of knowledge that the Pell community had always produced in its healers. And the depth was real, and the knowledge was real, and the results were real, and the results were in the barn. The community's distrust of the Pell name had been useful to 2 families who had wanted land and had used the healing practices as the vehicle for the wanting. And the usefulness had ended when the land was taken. But the distrust it had produced had been durable past its usefulness, the way that community conclusions about outsiders were always durable past their usefulness, because community conclusions did not require maintenance to persist, they persisted on their own, carried in the way that people carried things they had been told without examining them. She was done being carried in that way. The morning had produced the evidence, and the evidence was in the barn, and the evidence was going to go back to the Fallow Creek spread on 7 pairs of legs, and the community was going to know what the evidence was, and the community could do with the knowing what the community was going to do, and she was not going to manage the outcome. She was going to be at her property 3 miles north of the Fallow Creek Range, and she was going to practice openly, and Cass Aldrin was going to come back, not for an emergency, and both of those things were going to happen regardless of what the community decided to do with the evidence. The work was the work. It had always been the work. She had said at 2 in the morning, I'm going to clean this and set it and splint it. The cleaning is going to be the most painful part. Not who she was, not what the community thought, but what she was going to do. And the doing had been the whole of the night. And the whole of the night had been sufficient. and neither of them was going anywhere. And the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. He had said, "I should have come before I needed you." She had said, "People usually don't." He had said, "That's not a good reason." She had said, "No." These were 4 exchanges that each contained a specific thing and together contained the whole of what the 11 years had been and what the morning had changed and what the coming back was going to mean. She had been practicing in the specific reduced capacity that the outcast status had imposed, 12 consultations in 11 years, instead of the practice that the district needed from someone with her knowledge, and the reduced capacity had been a cost paid by the district as much as by her. There were people in the Fallow Creek district who had managed injuries or illnesses with insufficient care in 11 years because the person with the knowledge to provide the care was known without being welcomed. The cost of community distrust was not only borne by the person distrusted, it was borne by everyone in the community who needed what the distrusted person had. This was not something she had said to anyone. This was something she had understood and had carried without saying, because saying it would have been the kind of necessary conflict that she had not had the standing to conduct. Standing required being welcomed, and being welcomed had required the evidence, and the evidence had required the night. The night had happened, and the evidence was in the barn, and the standing was different now from what it had been at midnight when she had been in her house awake, because July was the month of storms. She had the standing now to say what needed to be said, and what needed to be said was that she was going to practice openly, and the district's distrust was a matter for the district to resolve, and the resolving was not going to happen on her schedule or in her direction, but the opening of the practice was going to happen on her schedule and in her direction, starting in the morning after the barn was cleaned. Cass Aldrin was going to come back. This was certain. The coming back was going to be the beginning of the something that both of them had been adjacent to without quite entering for the duration of the night, and the entering was going to happen in the days and weeks that followed. And the days and weeks were ahead of them. And neither of them was going anywhere. The barn was going to be cleaned, and the supplies were going to need replacing, and the chest injury man was going to get to Calloway before noon, and the evidence was going to go back to the Fallow Creek spread on 7 pairs of legs. And all of this was going to happen because she had opened a door at 2 in the morning and asked how many critical, and had gone to work. And the work was done, and neither of them was going anywhere. And the matter was settled, and both of them were staying. She had learned the work from her mother, and her mother had learned it from the Pell tradition, and the Pell tradition had been 2 generations of careful observation and refinement, and the passing on of what worked to the next person who was going to need it. And the passing on had reached Nessa Quirk, who had been applying it for 12 years in a barn here and a kitchen there, and a dozen consultations spread across 11 years, and tonight the application had been to 7 men in a barn by lantern light. And the application had worked, and all of them were going to be all right. This was what the work was. This was what it had always been. The community's distrust had reduced the opportunities for the work and had not changed what the work was, and the work was here and had always been here, and from the morning it was going to be here in the open rather than in the specific reduced form that the distrust had imposed. She was not going anywhere, and neither was Cass Aldrin. And the work was not going anywhere, and the knowledge was not going anywhere, and the Fallow Creek district in July was going to know by noon what 7 men and 1 rancher already knew, which was that the outcast healer was the only one worth coming to when it mattered, and the mattering had produced the morning, and the morning was here, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. The morning was the proof of the work, and the work was the proof of the knowledge, and the knowledge was the proof that the Pell name had never been about what the district had said it was about, and the proof was in the barn, and it was alive, and 7 pairs of legs were going to carry it back to the Fallow Creek spread, and the district was going to hear about it. And the hearing was going to be the beginning of the revising, and the revising was going to take the time it took, and she was going to be at her property 3 miles north practicing openly while it took, and Cass Aldrin was going to come back not for an emergency. And the coming back was going to be what it was going to be. And both of them were going to be there for it. And neither of them was going anywhere. And she had asked how many critical before she asked his name, and the answer had been 2 that I know of, maybe 3. And all of them were going to be all right. And all of them being all right was the morning. And the morning was here. And both of them were staying. And it held. She had been awake before he knocked, because July was the month of storms, and a woman with her knowledge slept lightly in July, and the storm had come and had produced the lightning, and the lightning had produced the night, and the night had produced the morning. And the morning was what it was, and what it was here, and both of them were staying. The knock had come at 2, and the morning had come at dawn, and between the 2 was a barn full of men who were going to be all right, and a man standing in the pre-dawn air who had said, "I'm going to come back," and had not meant for an emergency, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and the barn was behind them, and the morning was in front of them, and the work had been done correctly, and all of them were going to be all right, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. She had asked how many critical before she asked anything else, and the asking had been the whole of who she was, and who she was here, and not going anywhere, and the work was done, and both of them were staying. The 7 men were going to be all right, and the morning had come, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled completely, and finally, and both of them was going to be, and the being was going to happen here, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held.